Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling something, well, fundamental. We've got this stack of insights from some real giants: Jung, Freud, Festinger, Levine, a whole bunch.
Right. And we're using them to distill, the core knowledge you really need to get a handle on those hidden, powerful parts of yourself. The stuff that often runs the show from behind the scenes.
Exactly. We're putting on the metaphorical miner's helmet today. We're going deep, deep down into the psyche to confront what Carl Jung famously termed the shadow.
That's the mission. We're zeroing in on all that internal hidden stuff, everything you deny, everything you repress, maybe consciously or unconsciously, and crucially, how it all dictates things when you're not really paying attention.
Yeah. If you've ever felt like, you're your own worst enemy, or maybe certain kinds of conflicts just keep cropping up, like no matter who you're with.
The answer is almost always lurking in those darker corners of your own mind. So yeah, our job today is to shine a big spotlight right on them.
So think of this as a practical guide, really, a guide to what's called shadow work. We want to explore those uncomfortable truths living inside the unconscious.
And see how they actually manifest, externally, as these predictable fights or self-sabotaging patterns.
And most importantly, we'll dive into the actual psychological and behavioral processes, the concrete steps required for, well, genuine integration and lasting change. Not just understanding it, but doing something about it.
Definitely. But before we get too deep, we need a sort of psychological reality check, like ground zero.
Okay.
At a really basic level, we humans, we strive for consistency. It's fundamental. Leon Festinger studied this extensively.
Right, cognitive dissonance.
Exactly. When you have a major inconsistency, maybe, between what you believe and what you actually do, or between two beliefs that just clash, it creates this deep psychological discomfort. We call it dissonance.
That nagging feeling, yeah.
Yeah. It's more than nagging. It's this intense pressure to reduce it, to get back to some kind of internal harmony. And that fundamental pressure, that drive for consistency, that's really the starting point for so much internal conflict and, well, repression. It kicks the whole cycle off.
Okay, let's unpack this idea of the repressed self, maybe starting with the deep architecture. How Jung saw the mind's design. He didn't just see it as like a mirror reflecting the outside world.
No, not at all. He saw it as a unique self-generating force. He actually called the psyche a factor sui generis.
A unique factor.
Yeah. Basically, he meant the mind isn't just a passive receiver, like a camera taking pictures of the physical world. It's more like a projector. It actively translates physical stuff into sequences of images, of meanings.
So it's creating meaning, not just recording it.
Precisely. And these forms, these archetypal ideas, the hero, the mother, the trickster, and crucially, the shadow, they're what make knowledge possible in the first place. They bubble up spontaneously from the psyche itself. They build our reality from the inside out.
So, if the psyche is this self-generating force, what's it generating? We might assume it's aiming for, I don't know, peace, harmony. But Jung seems to suggest something different.
Yeah, he observed that the more you really understand life, the more you become aware of, and this is his phrase, the tremendous contradictions in human nature.
Contradictions.
We're fundamentally dualistic. We hold the capacity for incredible creativity and, well, terrible destruction. Love and hate, bravery and cowardice, they exist side by side within us. Harmony isn't the default state. Contradiction is where we start.
And you see that reflected all through history, right? The struggle with duality and philosophy, religion.
Absolutely. In some systems, maybe certain interpretations of Christianity, for example, these opposites might seem totally irreconcilable. Good versus evil, locked in eternal combat.
Right.
But for Jung, the real psychological journey, the path to becoming a whole person, what he called the individuation process, is about finding a way to integrate those opposites, the light and the dark.
Bring them together somehow.
Exactly. He used the mandala symbol, that unified circle, to represent this goal, bringing together things that seem fundamentally opposed. And that absolutely includes the shadow. You have to embrace the contradiction.
Okay, that makes sense. But it begs the question, why do we even create this shadow? Why push parts of ourselves away? Ernest Becker offers a really compelling, if maybe a little unsettling explanation.
Becker's work is powerful, yeah. He puts forward this sobering idea that we humans are kind of uniquely cursed, you could say. We grapple with two massive fears that other animals are mostly shielded from.
Which are?
The fear of life and the fear of death. Animals live more in the moment, driven by instinct. We're burdened by knowing we'll die and by the sheer complexity and potential pain of being alive.
That awareness. Just the weight of knowing our existence is finite, and the world is so overwhelming emotionally and sensorially,
Yeah.
it makes us flinch, essentially.
It forces a kind of recoil, yeah. And Becker argues this recoil is actually a necessary defense mechanism, though it comes at a cost. The child, he says, has to learn to avoid too much thought, too much perception, too much life.
Wow. Avoid too much life.
It's how we build our defenses, our character armor. We narrow ourselves down. We choose a specific version of ourselves, the acceptable mask, the persona, to show the world.
And everything else, everything that doesn't fit that mask.
Gets pushed aside, shunted into the unconscious. And this is where Becker uses that rather striking phrase.
The internal trash pile.
He calls it the residue of trashiness. And it's not just a poetic image, it's the real psychological fallout of all that avoidance.
So what's in this? Trashiness.
It's the choked up feelings, the desires you were told were bad or wrong, the anger you swallowed, the resentment from things you felt forced into, all that unprocessed emotional energy.
So on the surface, you might seem fine. Pleasant, responsible,
Yeah.
maybe even successful. That's the persona doing its job.
Exactly, the perfect mask. But underneath, that deep well of unintegrated trashiness, the aggression, the fear, the neediness, it's always threatening to bubble up. And you'll find a way out, either by sabotaging yourself or, much more commonly, by getting projected onto other people.
I think everyone can probably recognize moments of that, like a sudden burst of anger that feels way out of proportion, or maybe that really cutting passive aggression towards someone you supposedly love.
Absolutely. Or think about someone who's, say, obsessively neat and tidy. On the surface, it looks responsible, right?
Right.
But maybe, just maybe, it's the only acceptable outlet left for controlling the immense internal chaos or aggression they've repressed.
Ah, so the need for external control masks the lack of internal integration.
Precisely. The chaos, the trashiness has to be managed out there because facing it in here feels too dangerous. The underlying energy, the aggression or fear, is still present. It's just channeled into this compulsive behavior. And that unintegrated stuff, that's the energy we desperately need to reclaim for ourselves. Hashtag tag 1.2. Managing the instinctual impulses, Freud.
Okay, so Jung and Becker give us this picture of the shadow's contents, the split in our psyche. Freud then comes along and gives us more of the psychological engineering, maybe, the plumbing needed to manage the intense pressure from all these repressed instincts.
Right. Freud was very clear that the basic human program for attaining happiness, which is driven by the raw, untamed pleasure principle, simply can't work in the real world.
Reality gets in the way.
Reality is stubborn. It doesn't just bend to our every whim. So the pleasure principle, which wants instant gratification now, has to be modified. It gets transformed into the more sober and realistic reality principle.
So we trade unlimited happiness for what? Just avoiding pain.
Essentially, yeah. The immediate goal shifts from maximizing pleasure to minimizing suffering. We learn to delay gratification, to tolerate frustration, to navigate the demands of the external world.
We curb our demands.
Yeah.
Okay, but how do we actually do that? How does this lifelong act of emotional self-control happen?
Well, Freud said we do it mainly by influencing our own instinctual impulses, by learning to control the inner sources of our needs. And this control is wielded by what he called the higher psychical authorities.
The superego.
The superego, exactly. Which is basically an internalized version of parental rules, societal norms, morals, all the shoulds and shouldn'ts. And the superego rigidly enforces the reality principle. It's kind of the price we pay for living in a society.
Ah, and there's the catch. We get safety, order, civilization. But the cost of clamping down so hard internally is, well, less intense pleasure.
That's the trade-off. The psychological economy of repression, you could call it. The raw feeling of happiness you get from satisfying a truly wild, untamed impulse. Think of, I don't know, a sudden passionate outburst or giving in to a forbidden desire. Freud argued that feeling is incomparably more intense than the satisfaction you get from a tamed, controlled, socially acceptable impulse.
Which maybe explains why we sometimes feel drawn to things that are risky or forbidden. That edge.
It could be an unconscious echo, yeah. A craving for that raw intensity we sacrificed for the sake of fitting in, for safety.
And this whole dynamic, this trade-off, leads directly to a core source of unconscious suffering. Guilt. The anxiety from all this internal pressure doesn't just vanish.
No, it morphs. It often solidifies into a pervasive sense of guilt. For Freud, this guilt was fundamentally a type of anxiety, maybe fear of punishment, fear of losing love, fear of the superego's judgment.
But crucially, we often don't even know we feel guilty, right?
That's the really insidious part. This guilt, generated by civilization and hammered home by the superego, frequently remains totally unconscious. It doesn't feel like guilt explicitly. Instead, it shows up as this nagging unease, general discontent, chronic low-level depression, maybe self-sabotaging behaviors.
And because you don't know the real source, you look for reasons outside yourself.
Exactly. You feel bad, but you're not sure why. So you blame your job or your partner's annoying habits or the state of the world. Anything but the internal conflict.
And what's really mind-bending about the superego is just how aggressive its internal judgment can be. It's not just policing our actions.
No, not at all. This is a critical point. Before the superego is fully formed, guilt is mostly about remorse, feeling bad after you've actually done something aggressive or wrong.
Okay, that makes sense. Action leads to consequence, leads to feeling.
But once this internal, all-seeing superego takes charge, the rules change dramatically. The difference between thinking about doing something aggressive and actually doing it, that distinction basically evaporates for the superego.
Wait, hang on. So the superego is like internal thought police.
Yeah.
It judges our wishes just as harshly as our actions. That seems like a recipe for constant anxiety.
It is. It generates a huge amount of internal pressure. The sense of guilt now comes not just from, say, actually yelling at someone, but also from just wanting to yell at them. Merely intending the aggressive act is enough. Think about it. You get cut off in traffic. For a split second, you have this flash of violent fantasy, right? Even though you don't act on it, you keep driving calmly. That fleeting internal flicker of aggression. The superego clocks it immediately, and it dishes out a dose of unconscious anxiety and shame.
Even though nothing actually happened externally.
Correct. That internal authority is judging your thoughts, your daydreams, your repressed desires, just as severely as your outward behavior. And all that energy, all that judged shadow material gets locked away even tighter under layers and layers of this unconscious anxiety and guilt.
Okay, so we've got this internal pressure cooker building up. It's fueled by repressed desires, maybe some deep existential fear like Becker talked about, and layers of unconscious Freudian guilt. When we try to, live our lives, engage with the world, especially form close relationships, this internal stuff inevitably spills out.
It has to go somewhere. The relationship, the workplace, maybe even our social groups. They become the stage where we act out our unintegrated internal drama. Hashtag 2.1 relationships as emotional mirrors.
There's that saying, isn't there? Relationships are mirrors.
It's a simple psychological truth, but man, is it hard to accept sometimes. We are constantly exporting our inner world. When we refuse to deal with our own internal contradictions, when we let the shadow run rampant, all those unhealed wounds, that residue of trashiness Becker mentioned, it shows up externally.
How does it show up?
Oh, in lots of ways. Maybe as chronic defensiveness, you can't take any feedback, or unwarranted contempt for your partner, or the opposite, maybe excessive people-pleasing, where you erase your own needs completely.
And attachment theory provides a really clear lens on how this internal avoidance creates very specific, predictable conflicts.
Yeah.
Like the classic anxious avoidant trap.
Oh yeah, that's textbook projection meeting reality. Let's take an example, say, Greg. He's got an avoidant attachment style. He feels this deep compulsion to push intimacy away. Now, consciously, he might think it's because his partner, Tamara, isn't the one, or she's too needy. But the real reason is internal. The closeness itself, the vulnerability that real intimacy demands, feels deeply uncomfortable, maybe even threatening to him. It triggers all his repressed stuff, his fear of engulfment, perhaps.
And because he's not looking inward, because he's avoiding his own shadow material, he finds an external reason.
Exactly. He convinces himself the problem is her or the relationship. So he distances himself, maybe breaks it off, only to find himself repeating the exact same pattern with the next person.
Meanwhile, the anxious partner, Tamara in this case, might be mirroring her own internal fears of abandonment by clinging tighter.
Precisely. So you get this painful dance. One person pulls away because closeness feels unsafe. The other grasps tighter because distance feels like abandonment. When intimacy needs are that mismatched, fueled by unintegrated fears on both sides, relationship satisfaction plummets. Conflict becomes the norm. That trap is entirely choreographed by internal, unacknowledged fears being projected outward.
And this projection doesn't just cause fights, it actually distorts how we see reality, especially past events. John Gottman's research on marriage conflict, his 4 horsemen idea.
Yeah, criticism, contempt, defensiveness, stonewalling. When those become the default mode in a relationship, negativity basically rewrites history.
How so?
Think about memory distortion. In a basically healthy, secure relationship, If one partner, say, forgets to pick up the dry cleaning, the other might think, oh, they must be stressed or busy day. They attribute it to a temporary external cause.
Simple mistake.
Right. But in an unhappy marriage where negativity is entrenched, where both partners are likely projecting their own stored up resentment and hurt, that same exact action for getting the dry cleaning gets interpreted totally differently.
Ow.
It's immediately seen as evidence of a fixed negative character trait. See, he's always so inconsiderate. He's fundamentally selfish.
Wow. So the fact forgetting the dry cleaning hasn't changed, but the meaning assigned to it changes completely.
Radically. It changes to fit the negative feeling that's already there, the feeling that's being projected, the unintegrated shadow, the anger, the feeling of being unappreciated, whatever it is basically painted onto the partner. They become the villain who justifies the internal bad feeling. It's a perfect example of externalizing your internal conflict so you don't have to own it.
Yeah.
Hashtag tag 2.2, cognitive dissonance and social validation.
Okay, let's zoom out a bit from intimate relationships. This projection, this need to manage our internal world, also shapes how we deal with social groups, information, even the news we consume. And a lot of that comes back to cognitive dissonance.
It really does. Festinger's theory is so powerful here. The mechanism is incredibly efficient. Anytime you make a decision between two or more alternatives, especially if they were both kind of appealing, you're left with some dissonance. Because you gave up the good parts of the thing you didn't choose.
That little voice saying, maybe I should have picked the other one.
Exactly. And that tension, that dissonance, creates immediate psychological pressure. You have to reduce it somehow.
So what are the typical ways we do that? How do we shut that little voice up?
Well, the most common way is to basically rewrite the narrative in your head. You start changing how you think about the options. You pump up the positives of the thing you chose. Oh, this car I bought, it's got the best safety rating, the mileage is amazing, and simultaneously you minimize its downsides. Yeah, the color isn't perfect, but that's trivial.
And you do the opposite for the rejected option.
Absolutely. You inflate its flaws. That other car, terrible reviews, probably would have broken down, dodged a bullet there.
Yeah.
You essentially exaggerate how bad the alternative was. We're constantly tweaking reality after the fact to make our choices feel more right, more inevitable.
And we don't just do this internally, right? We look for outside help.
Oh, massively. Social validation is huge for dissonance reduction. Social groups are an incredibly valuable resource here.
How so?
When that internal conflict, that dissonance is really high, maybe you made a big risky decision. You actively seek out people who agree with you, who validate your choice.
Like finding fellow fans of the card you just bought.
Exactly. Surrounding yourself with people who say, yeah, great choice, you did the right thing, provides confirming, consonant information. It directly eases that internal discomfort. If I'm doubting my decision, but all my friends or people I respect tell me I nailed it, poof, the dissonance often just evaporates, resolved externally.
What's really interesting is how this drive, this need to reduce dissonance, actually changes how we communicate with each other.
Yeah.
It can make us want to, convert people.
It absolutely can drive proselytizing, yeah. Think about it. Not only do we tend to hang out more with people who already share our views, creating those infamous echo chambers,
Right.
but we also often feel this strong urge to change the minds of people who disagree with us. That intense desire to convince others, to argue, to win them over, whether it's politics, sports teams, whatever. It's often not purely about finding the objective truth.
It's about reducing our own discomfort.
A lot of the time, yes. If you hold a belief that contradicts mine, you are actively creating dissonance in me. Your disagreement makes me uncomfortable. So I feel this pressure to either change your mind, bring you into alignment with me, or if that fails, maybe just avoid you altogether to protect my own internal consistency.
And we see this in how we consume information too, right?
Yeah.
Choosing news sources that confirm what we already believe.
Definitely. That's self-selection bias in media consumption. You are, often unconsciously, curating your information environment to shield yourself from dissonance.
Wow.
Your own psychological defense mechanisms are directing you, filtering reality, pushing you towards information and people that reinforce your existing worldview. It keeps you comfortable, sure, but it also protects you from the challenging possibility that maybe your beliefs are incomplete or maybe even wrong. That same avoidance mechanism that built the shadow initially is now operating socially, filtering your whole world.
Okay, this brings us to a really sharp contrast. We've spent all this time deep inside the head, the psyche, the superego, internal dissonance, projections. But what if we just stepped outside all of that.
Yeah, this is where someone like B.F. Skinner offers a necessary, radically different perspective. Skinner's behaviorism essentially takes that whole autonomous inner man we've been dissecting and just abolishes it, gets rid of it.
Whoa. So no inner conflicts driving things.
For Skinner, no. The focus shifts completely. The cause of behavior isn't some mysterious internal struggle. It's the observable environment and your history of learning within that environment.
So he just bypasses all the Jungian and Freudian psychodrama.
Yeah.
No internal gatekeeper, no repression in the same way.
Pretty much. The idea of an inner self making choices or wrestling with impulses is replaced by external factors, specifically the contingencies of reinforcement you've experienced.
What does that mean, contingencies of reinforcement?
It means the patterns of rewards and punishments in your environment that have shaped your behavior over time. Skinner argued that even something like attention isn't directed by some inner will. It's controlled by these external contingencies. He'd say we can arrange the environment so that even a simple organism, like a pigeon, will pay attention to one thing, like color, and ignore another, like shape, based entirely on reinforcement.
So the environment pulls the strings, not some inner self.
That's the core idea. The mysterious inner man is replaced by the environment, which Skinner saw as responsible for both how the species evolved and for the specific behaviors any individual learns. It suggests a very different path to change, too. Forget digging into the shadow, just change the environmental rewards and punishments, and the behavior will change. It's a stark contrast to everything else we've discussed.
Okay, so we've mapped out the internal chaos, Becker's residue of trashiness. And we've seen how it leaks out, how it projects onto others, warps our relationships, drives us toward comfortable echo chambers because of dissonance. Now we get to the really hard part, the intentional, conscious effort required to actually integrate this shadow material.
Right, this is where we talk about reclaiming all that psychological energy that's currently tied up in keeping things repressed and managing that internal conflict. Hashtag tagged tag 3.1, confronting chaos to find meaning.
According to Jung, how do we even start this integration process? It sounds daunting.
It is daunting, and Jung was clear. It's not about making the shadow disappear or pretending it's not there. That doesn't work. The path requires us to really get to grips with those chaotic, compulsive forces inside us. The raw terror, the rage, the deep-seated fears.
Well, it sounds less like gentle self-help and more like, I don't know, descending into a dark cave to face a monster.
In some ways, that's not a bad analogy. It takes courage. But here's the really fascinating, almost paradoxical finding from this journey. Jung found that when you do face this task, when you really look that terror or chaos straight in the eye, you start to realize something profound.
What's that?
That hidden within all that seemingly senseless, cruel sporting with human fate, as he put it all, those compulsive drives and inner conflicts, there lies a kind of secret knowledge, a hidden wisdom.
So the very things we pushed away because they felt too dangerous or chaotic actually hold the keys.
Precisely. The parts of ourselves that feel the most terrifying often contain the most potential for growth and meaning. And the more you begin to recognize this hidden meaning behind the compulsion, the more the force itself, whether it's addiction or avoidance or rage, starts to lose its raw, arbitrary power over you.
How does that happen?
Recognizing the meaning allows for a kind of psychological sorting process. Jung talked about the meaningful dividing itself from the meaningless. You start to understand, for example, that the intense anger wasn't just random chaos. It was actually a vital signal, maybe pointing to a boundary that was violated long ago.
Separating the signal from the noise. That sounds like the real work.
It is the alchemy. Once sense and nonsense aren't all jumbled together anymore, the sheer power of the chaos gets weakened. Because you've subtracted the part that was just noise. The sense, the meaning you've uncovered, now gets infused with the power that the chaos used to hold. And out of that integration, Jung says, a new cosmos can arise, a more whole, more ordered sense of self. You stop just blindly reacting because you finally understand the message the chaos was trying to deliver.
But this internal conflict, this chaos, it isn't just in our heads, is it? It feels intensely physical sometimes. Peter Levine's work, Somatic Experiencing, really brings the body into this picture.
Oh, absolutely crucial. Levine makes it crystal clear that traumatic symptoms, which are often deeply intertwined with shadow material, are physiological events, not just psychological ones. You cannot integrate the shadow without involving the body.
Why is the body so central?
Because when your nervous system faces what it perceives as an overwhelming threat, something too big, too fast, too much, it goes into overdrive. It mobilizes this massive amount of survival energy. Think fight or flight. It's like slamming the accelerator to the floor.
Okay, ready for action.
But what if you can't fight or flee? What if the threat is inescapable or you're trapped? Levine found that the body then does something else simultaneously. It slams on a powerful internal brake, the freeze response. It does this to prevent total system overload, but the result is...
Oh, the gas and the brake are floored at the same time.
Exactly. And that state, that profound immobility when every fiber of your being wants to escape but can't, isn't just a thought. It's experienced as real physiological helplessness. It's terrifying.
And the energy mobilized for fight or flight. Where does it go?
That's the core problem. When that huge surge of activated survival energy isn't discharged, when you don't get to complete the defensive action, you didn't run, you didn't fight, you couldn't shake it off, it stays trapped, locked in the nervous system, in the tissues.
And that trapped energy causes problems later.
It creates a self-perpetuating cycle. The body, physiologically, basically concludes the danger must still be present because the energy charge hasn't resolved. So it stays on high alert, leading to all sorts of debilitating trauma symptoms, anxiety, hypervigilance, dissociation, chronic pain. That energy is screaming to be discharged.
So how do people typically cope with this trapped energy long term if they don't discharge it?
Levine observed two main patterns. Many people try to manage it by internalizing those instinctive defensive responses. He calls this acting in.
What does acting in look like?
It can look like self-criticism, self-hatred, deep depression, even self-harm. The aggression or escape energy that couldn't be directed outward at the original threat gets turned inward against the self. The self becomes the enemy.
And the alternative?
The alternative is acting out. This is where you see compulsive reenactment. The person feels driven, often unconsciously, to repeat scenarios that somehow echo the original traumatic situation.
Why would they do that?
It's like the nervous system is desperately trying again and again to find a way to finally complete that thwarted defensive response. Think of someone who keeps ending up in relationships that feel just like their abusive childhood home, or a combat veteran who, maybe unconsciously, engages in risky behaviors that mimic the danger they faced. They're stuck in a loop trying to discharge that old trapped energy. Real integration, real healing, has to involve finding safe ways for the body to finally complete those interrupted actions and release that charge. Hashtag 3.2 tools for navigating change.
Okay, so the problem is deep. It's got unconscious psychological roots, maybe learned behaviors, and definitely trapped physical energy. So what are the practical tools, the things you can actually do to navigate this change and start integrating the shadow?
Well, a crucial starting point, building on Levine's work, is learning to listen to your body's own language. He talks about harnessing the felt sense.
The felt sense. What is that exactly?
It's that raw, nonverbal, physical sensation in your body. The knot in your stomach, the tightness in your chest, the heat in your face. It's your instinctual voice, providing data before your thinking mind jumps in. Accessing repressed shadow material often means learning to track these sensations.
How do you do that?
It requires, as Levine emphasizes, gentleness, moving slowly. You need to approach these sensations with an open, curious attitude, like a friendly scientist observing something new.
And the key thing here seems really counterintuitive, especially for, smart analytical people. You're not supposed to figure out what it means right away.
Exactly. That's the crucial instruction. Your job isn't to immediately interpret or analyze, oh, this not means I'm anxious about the meeting. No, your job is just to be with the sensation. Notice its qualities. Is it hot or cold? Is it buzzing or still? Does it have a shape, a color? Where does it start and end?
So you just observe it without judgment or trying to fix it.
Right. Paradoxically, trying to force meaning or analyze it too quickly often keeps you stuck in your head. You frequently get to the deeper psychological insight faster by slowing down, staying with the pure physical sensation, and letting the meaning emerge organically from the body itself.
Alongside listening to the body, shifting our mental perspective seems vital. Carol Dweck's work on mindset and Martin Seligman's on optimism. They seem really relevant here for dealing with the inevitable setbacks.
Hugely relevant. Think about facing a challenge, maybe getting negative feedback or failing at something. Someone with a growth mindset, as Dweck describes it, sees that setback differently.
How?
They focus on process and effort. They might think, okay, that didn't work, I need to try a different strategy, or I didn't study enough for that test, but I can improve next time. They see it as a learning opportunity.
As opposed to
a fixed mindset, which interprets the same setback as proof of a permanent flaw. I failed the test, therefore I'm stupid, or I got rejected, therefore I'm unlovable. That feeling of utter failure, tying the outcome to a fixed internal trait, is incredibly damaging and keeps the shadow fed.
And Seligman showed that how we explain bad events to ourselves, our explanatory style isn't fixed either. We can learn optimism.
That's such a hopeful insight. Pessimism, he found, is often learned maybe from critical parents or difficult life experiences. We learn to explain bad events as being permanent. It's always going to be like this, pervasive, it ruins everything, and personal. It's all my fault.
But optimism can be learned too.
Yes. Just like we learn pessimism, we can learn optimism. Cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, is largely built on this. It teaches you to notice your automatic negative thoughts, challenge them, and practice reframing setbacks in more constructive ways.
So instead of I fail at everything,
You learn to reframe it as, okay, I failed at this specific task right now, perhaps because I was tired or unprepared, temporary, specific, external, changeable. That simple shift in explanation builds resilience and directly counteracts the harsh global judgments often coming from the superego or the shadow.
okay, let's get really practical now. Behavioral redesign. Using tools to make the actual doing of this integration work easier, more consistent. Because insight isn't enough, right? We often know what to do, but struggle to do it.
Absolutely. We tend to bite off more than we can chew, especially when facing something difficult like shadow work. This is where James Clear's 2-minute rule is genius.
Explain that.
When you're starting any new habit, could be meditating for insight, journaling about your shadow projections, exercising to release physical tension, the initial version of the habit should take less than 2 minutes to complete.
Less than 2 minutes. That seems tiny.
Exactly. If your ultimate goal is to meditate for 30 minutes, your starting goal is meditate for 1 minute. If you want to journal pages, your starting goal is write 1 sentence. If you want to run a marathon, maybe your starting goal is just put on running shoes.
Why start so small? It's not about the output at that stage.
Precisely. It's not about achieving the big goal immediately. It's about neutralizing the resistance, the friction. It's about casting a vote for the identity of someone who does that thing. It's much harder to say, I don't have time for something that takes 60 seconds. You make it trivially easy to start.
And success builds on success.
Right. Change sticks better when it feels immediately successful and, if possible, enjoyable. Think about simple reinforcements. The nice minty taste makes you want to brush your teeth again. Seeing even a small amount of money hit your savings automatically feels good. You want to structure these difficult internal tasks so that there's some immediate reward or feeling of accomplishment, however small. The shadow resists huge, painful efforts. It often yields, surprisingly, to consistent, tiny, successful steps.
Okay, finally, let's bring this back to relationships and how we communicate, especially during conflict, and the role of self-compassion as a foundation for all this.
Self-compassion is absolutely fundamental. Kristen Neff's work highlights this. It's crucial for finding the courage to face the shadow and also for setting healthy boundaries externally without resorting to either aggression or collapsing.
She talks about 2 sides of self-compassion, right? Tender and fierce.
Yeah, it's a brilliant distinction. We need tender self-compassion, that ability to be kind to ourselves when we suffer, to soothe our own wounds, acknowledge our pain, accept our imperfections without harsh judgment. That's vital.
But we also need the other side.
We also need fierce self-compassion. This is the more action-oriented side. It's the energy that motivates us to protect ourselves, to say no, to speak up against injustice, to draw boundaries, to make sure our needs get met.
So it's empowered, but not necessarily angry.
Exactly. Fierce self-compassion allows you to value yourself enough to take necessary action. But critically, it's not the same as lashing out in aggressive anger or self-righteous hostility. That's often the shadow acting out its pain. Fierce self-compassion is centered, assertive action rooted in self-worth, and the desire for well-being for yourself and others.
And we can bring this self-owning, boundary-setting energy directly into how we communicate during disagreements.
Absolutely. A really effective technique is consciously shifting your language. Moving away from blaming you statements like, you always ignore me, which just trigger defensiveness.
To what?
To owning I statements. A really useful structure is, I notice, I feel, I need. For example, I notice that when plans change last minute, I feel anxious and unimportant. What I need is a bit more predictability or advance notice if possible.
So you state the observation, the feeling it causes in you, and then a clear need or request.
Yes, and then ideally you follow it up with a clear request and maybe even ask the other person to reflect back what they heard you say. Could you tell me what you heard me ask for?
That mirroring part. That seems really important for making sure the message landed correctly.
It's incredibly powerful. It forces both people out of their assumptions and potential projections. When someone accurately mirrors your feeling and need back to you without distorting it, it's deeply validating. It de-escalates conflict because you feel heard. It grounds the conversation in reality, not just competing internal narratives. It's a practical way to foster integration within the relationship itself. Hashtag tag outro.
Wow, that was quite a journey, a really deep dive into the self. We started by mapping out those unseen inner contradictions that Jung highlighted the absolute necessity of integrating the shadow.
Uh-huh. And we layered in Freud's insights on those repressed desires and the pervasive, often unconscious guilt, which Becker then framed so vividly with his concept of the residue of trashiness.
Then we watched how all that internal chaos doesn't stay contained. It projects outward, doesn't it? It distorts our memories, our perceptions, fuels conflict in relationships, and even drives us, as Festinger showed, into these cognitive bubbles, seeking validation and avoiding dissonance.
But crucially, the deep dive also illuminated the path forward, that heroic, necessary work Jung described confronting the chaos not to destroy it, but to find the hidden meaning within it.
And recognizing, through thinkers like Levine, that this isn't just a mental exercise, it's deeply physiological. We have to engage the body, listen to the felt sense, release trapped energy.
And then bring in those practical tools. Mindset shifts from Dweck and Seligman, behavioral tricks like the 2-minute rule, and fostering both tender and fierce self-compassion as the bedrock for change and healthy communication. It's really about moving from being reactive, driven by these hidden forces, to consciously leading our own lives.
So to wrap up, we always like to leave our listeners with a final, maybe provocative thought to chew on.
Okay. Well, thinking about the sheer effort involved in this internal integration, consider how much energy people typically dedicate to external things. Seeking social validation, managing appearances, pursuing immediate emotional gratification or connection.
Right, a lot of focus goes outward.
So here's the question. What might happen if you decided to prioritize the internal process? If you chose to confront and understand your own psychological residue, that trashiness with the same intensity, the same focus, the same dedication that people often pour into optimizing their social standing or external relationships?
Shifting that energy inward.
Yeah. Remember, this deep work, this internal mastery, this claiming of psychic sovereignty, it's not really meant for external applause. It doesn't usually get likes or promotions. It's an internal alchemy, often done in private.
So the provocation is?
Imagine truly dedicating yourself to becoming the primary authority, the compassionate curator of your own inner world, treating that process with the utmost seriousness and attention. What kind of integrated, resilient, genuinely powerful self could emerge from that kind of sustained internal focus?
That is definitely something to mull over. Until our next deep dive.